Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Founder and the Funder. I'm Devarsh.
And I'm Avik.
I'm a founder.
And I'm the funder.
And today we have with us a very, very special guest.
Hi, I'm Megha. I'm the author of Unseen, this new book that's out, and I'm here on this podcast to talk to these two. Very excited to be here.
Thank you for being here. I think it's a privilege. We've clearly done something right to get somebody like you on our podcast with less than 10 episodes out. So feeling good about ourselves, I think, a little bit.
Yeah.
We're having a nice conversation about this. But Megha, I think you have one of the most interesting stories I have read about personally. Like before we get into anything that you've actually covered, you were a journalist at CNBC for a
Yes.
lot of time, and
Yes.
one of your mentors was Shireen Bhan,
Yes.
right? Who I think in many ways the Young Turks program. I've had the pleasure to meet a couple of the Turks, Rajiv Samant and Nitish Midis, and I genuinely think in many ways that was like she had identified founders before, like decades before Shark Tank, decades before it was
Cool.
cool, before it was sexy, before
Yeah.
the glam associated with it. So how was that like? How was the journalism journey like?
Phenomenal. And I couldn't have asked for a better start. Of course, when I was in journalism school, one thinks of many other genres of journalism. Business journalism was something that I just happened to stumble upon. I remember my interview with Shireen, since you spoke about that. This had It had been a bit since I was trying to find the right kind of job, the right kind of newsroom to be in. And I remember my interview with her where she was I was actually applying for some other role, and I had prepped for that entire interview. That role was here in Mumbai, in the Mumbai CNBC TV 18 office. So I gave my full interview in the sense that, yeah, I love Mumbai. I'm going to be here. I can totally do this role. Uh, so that was my whole spiel. And right at the end, like I think the last 2 minutes, she was like, "Okay, this is great. Okay, this was a job on the desk. You do this in Mumbai, but what do you think about doing a job here in Delhi?" So for a second, I just paused, and that Delhi was home for me. So I obviously wanted to jump at that opportunity. The only thing she said was that, "Have you heard about Young Turks?" And I had to confess, I was like, "No. Have you heard about, what do you know about entrepreneurship?" And I was fresh out of school. Just, I had a basic idea of what entrepreneurship or the world of startups was about. And that's when I got introduced through that show, which had been on air for about 10 years. And I realized the kind of legacy that show had had. And I got the opportunity to be a trainee on that show. So that's how I started my journey. And of course, Shireen has been my boss, my mentor, my life coach in some sense. Just watching her, I learned about not just journalism, but I learned about the power of preparation. I learned about what it takes to kind of cover the stories. I feel like my journey couldn't have had a better start because Young Turks, as you said, identified entrepreneurs and startups. And I was introduced to this world. I ended up meeting some of the most phenomenal founders, covered the most amazing startup stories through that show. And that's how I fell in love with storytelling even more. That's where I started.
Wow. And something that really kind of stood out for me is after that, you actually jumped to the to be part of an entrepreneurial journey.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit more?
Yes, I was in the newsroom for close to a decade. Was an absolutely phenomenal run. I was covering startups, and technology eventually became my core beat. Um, as part of that, I started looking at the technological landscape, especially the consumer technological landscape. Eventually, I ended up moving to a startup myself. I was one of the earliest employees at Nothing, which is a consumer tech company, and understanding the business of hardware, which is extremely hard. I was one of the earliest employees there. I saw what it takes to not just build a hardware business, but build a startup itself. So, having been on one side where I was just an analyst, or an observer of what it takes to build a startup, to moving on the other side, supporting a founder, building his dream. It was it brought in a whole different level of perspective and empathy. To be honest, I realized what it really takes, and I guess that gave me like a 360-degree view of this whole space. So yeah, that was
So
super
did it ever
interesting.
feel really funny? Because at one point you're picking up all the gadgets and then you're saying, hey, you know what, let me deconstruct this. And now suddenly you're watching somebody else do that to the product that you're kind of
Oh,
contributing.
it was definitely a lot, because on suddenly you're on this side. Pretty much how this podcast feels, honestly. Like in my head, I'm supposed to be asking the questions, and the two people on the other side are supposed to be answering.
So you
So
can't
this
take the
is
journalist out of it.
I know. So it did feel a lot like that, because now suddenly you're pitching the product and you're saying what it takes and communicating that story. But at the end of the day, I also realize that as journalists, you try and tell a story. Eventually, as a product marketer, I realized I was doing the same thing, but in a different role and avatar. That's it. It's all about telling that story, and as long as your message is authentic and it gets communicated, I feel like it's the skill set is the same. It's just the role shifts a little.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a weird experience, but definitely a fulfilling one.
Very cool. Should we go into the next
Yeah.
segment?
We should, but just
Yes.
before that, there's
Yeah.
one thing which I want to ask you, Megha, because this is a pet peeve of mine. I think we brought it up on a podcast previously as well. Um, one of the problems with the way mainstream journalism covers startups today is all
Oh,
about funding round. No, I know this is something that we keep discussing, because I remember, so at Bombay Founders Club, a lot of journalists, they come and they speak to our founders, and one of the first questions some of them ask me is that, oh, which one of them have just closed funding rounds, and what is the size of the rounds? And we want to talk to, like, it's more about the funding numbers
Yeah.
than the actual founder story. And as a founder, and I think one of the things I love about your book, that it is not about the numbers. In fact, it's not even about the company as much as it is about the founder and the genuine journey of building up, right? So what's your take on this? Like, do you also feel that the media is over indexing in many ways for funding rounds, etc., or do you feel that that's how it should be?
Let's rewind a little, and let's talk about entrepreneurship and where it has been in India, right? um think about the West. They've kind of had a much longer time starting up. They've had that coming of age, and then they've matured, and then they've had that whole cycle. I feel like in India, especially, the world of startups and entrepreneurship suddenly took off, and there was suddenly an overdrive. Now, of course, startups is just, it's, you won't be called out if you're a founder. But if you rewind a little, it was an anomaly to be a founder. It was an anomaly to wanting to start something of your own that's not a dhanda or a traditional business.
Yeah.
At some point, perhaps getting a funding round or having someone just give you money to fund your dream felt like a validation. And I'm talking about, say, 10, 15 years before, right? Or from today, like 10, 15 years ago. So at that point, perhaps it was, and I'm not defending the media, but what I'm trying to say is that it was something that founders also prided themselves on. The fact that they managed to convince somebody and sold their vision and raised funds.
Because for a lot of them, this is finally something you could take home. You can be like, look, somebody else believes that what I'm doing is not
It is
insane.
It's the was, let's say, the ultimate validation, right? That someone is really cutting the check and giving you that money to fund your vision because they believe in you. So in some sense, perhaps funding became the ultimate form of validation. I think, as is with anything, like anything in excess is harmful, and that's what started to happen. Maybe certain startups got more spotlight because they raised a certain amount of fund from a certain investor, especially if they were, like some international investor who's come and back to you, and suddenly you're talking about, it's not like just INR funding, it's like, oh, you're valued in millions. And I think those just made for really good headlines, and it gave you that kind of coverage. So eventually everyone started chasing for it. But as a founder, you would know that that's just one part of the journey, right?
Like it may be newsworthy. For
Yeah.
example, if a big company takes a lot of debt, it's newsworthy, but you're not throwing a party to celebrate a loan,
Fair.
right?
Fair.
It's just I think a lot of the founders I meet today, they are almost scared of the post funding nightmare, right? Because suddenly you have far more disclosures, you have far many more obligations, you're under far more pressure. You can't make as many
Fair.
mistakes.
And to be honest, I think that I can speak through, especially during my days as a journalist, we had stories that spoke about founders. We had stories that spoke about their journey, how the idea started, how is it different, what were the challenges, that didn't speak about funding at all. And then there were some stories that focused on funding,
Yeah.
but fortunately or unfortunately, that's the one that
Yeah.
perhaps got more eyeball.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's a it's a producer and a consumer sort of
Yeah.
dilemma.
Mm.
Ultimately, there are readers who are interested or were interested in, okay, who's raised how much funds. I don't think that's true anymore. I feel like there was that frenzy that happened, and then that cycle has kind of, I don't know. You tell me, like, is that
I still get asked that. I still get asked about the numbers first before anything else. And
by
about funding.
journalists?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, not all of them, but a lot of them, they start with like, tell me about the numbers, who's raised funding. We want to talk to the guys who just raised funding. More than 5 mil, we want to speak to them tomorrow. Less than 5 mil, yeah, when we get time this month. It's a
I mean, similarly, as
Yeah.
running a fund,
Yeah.
typically when you're having a call with a journalist, and they always, so I would love to highlight, hey, this is a company that went from like 1 million to 20 million in
Yeah.
revenue.
Yeah.
And in 2 years, this is one of the fastest changes that ever happened. Oh, but they also raised $54 million in funding. I was like, that was a byproduct of having this growth. And then suddenly your headline will read, startup gets 54 million funding. I'm like, you just
Yeah.
missed why they got that money.
Yeah.
Completely.
I think majority of us are guilty of that.
Yeah.
I would say, and playing devil's advocate, I think in some way when you're on the outside, it feels like, okay, if someone's kind of bet money, they're legit.
Yeah.
Because there have been times where, you've gone ahead and you've covered stories or you've covered founders that probably shouldn't have got that kind of spotlight.
Fair.
But when you're so removed and you're not the one you're doing your research, but that's not due diligence.
Yeah.
So maybe in some sense, it feels like, okay, if XYZ fund has backed ABC startup, theek hai, legit hai. So
Lot.
perhaps that's sort of a checkpoint.
Yeah.
Not a good one, not something that should be highlighted. Maybe, but I feel like we've moved away from that, and the Indian startup ecosystem has matured from those days, or I hope
So,
it has.
so before we kind of really jump in, when you were writing these stories,
Yeah.
typically how much time did you get to spend with founders? How many people
Yeah.
around the founder did you actually get to speak to? Because as a journalist, I mean, one of your pieces is also you need to keep producing content.
Yeah, so there are two parts of it. One was, say, for instance, you have these feature shows, which are long format shows. You get that's like weekly ones, and I'm talking about days in television. So, you did have more time to research those stories, and you put in a lot more effort in kind of going about understanding the founders, spending time with them. Even our shoots were like very long. Then you'd go back and forth with the questions. There's a slight luxury when you're doing feature shows in terms of time. The other part is your daily live shows. That typically just covers your news. Who's raised how much funds, for instance, or if there's a new feature that some company has started, or some sort of M&A, or just a daily news cycle that you hear about, like just the top stories.
Yeah.
So I think those are bits that you, of course, research and you do your due diligence, but spending time with founders and getting to understand them and covering that's more of a luxury that you have on long format shows. Your daily news moves in at a much faster
Quicker pace,
rate.
yeah.
So how much time did you spend with Dipinder and the people around him while writing this book?
Well, this was a much longer process. Let's just say that this was not a weekly show or a daily deadline that I was
Yeah.
trying to meet.
Yeah.
The book has been in the making for close to 3 years. And one of the top reasons was to kind of write this book was that over the course of my journey as a journalist, having spent so much time with so many founders and understanding them beyond the milestones and the fundings and the number and headlines, was that there is a deeply human side to starting up and entrepreneurship. And that was my endeavor when I was kind of bringing the story out. And I talk about it in the book as well, where I say that most of the journey of starting up or entrepreneurship is behind the scenes. It is those unsexy things that's happening, right? Like that nobody talks about, or it doesn't have an audience, or no one is interested in reading. But that is what makes entrepreneurship or the journey of a founder real.
Yeah.
So that was the idea of bringing this story out. And yes, it's been in the making for about 3 years.
Wow.
I had a lot of time that I spent initially with Dipinder, and got to know him and got to know his story and the making of Zomato, and realized that there is so much that, you know, in this story that could perhaps benefit other founders, and that's how we decided to turn it into a book.
So, before we go in,
Yeah.
when did do you have a recollection of that aha moment where I think the eyes met and both of you were like, this can become?
There was no both of you. He didn't want this.
He didn't want-
Like just this.
Yeah.
Let's just put it. I think like what happens is that, especially maybe the thought of having a book on you, it just, like his first reaction when I told him that I think this is a story and I need to write this, was that, you know, we're not there yet. Why would we write this book? We're not, because in some sense you feel that you kind of write a book at the end of something, or when you're a certain someone at a certain time. I don't think there was one aha moment. I just felt that while I was talking to Dipinder and I was understanding who he was, where he came from, and I learnt about it in a very generic conversation, I realized that there is a story to tell. And I think as a journalist, you always kind of spot that story.
Yeah.
For me, just something about him felt very different, and I couldn't put a finger on what that was. And that's how my curiosity began, and I wanted to learn more about him and understand how such a simple idea of just digitizing menus became what it became. And you know, you think about what Eternal is today. I just wanted to kind of cover that story. And it is a story that's still in the making. That's perhaps why he was hesitant, and he felt that, no, we're not there yet. I don't think we should.
Yeah.
There's no book and stuff that we're doing right now. But that's okay, right? At some point, I think we were able to arrive at the fact that this is a story that is still continuing, and that's okay. We can capture it
Captured.
till this
Yes.
time, and you know, there can always be something that documents the story from here. But yeah, I guess that just felt that a young founder today, if they have to look at a startup story or someone's journey, you would perhaps lean in on an international founder or an entrepreneur, or you would read about legends and absolute icons, but they built perhaps at a time where challenges that they faced when they were starting up are not relevant today.
True.
Zomato kind of felt that story that
There's
it's
probably
slowly
no one more relevant than Dipinder today.
No.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how it started.
But you know, one of the things you said, that Dipinder said that, I'm not there yet. I've realized this is the hallmark of some of the best founders I've spoken to. There is this amazing founder, Avik knows him very well as well. His name is Pankaj Gupta,
Mhm.
right? The man has sold 2 startups, I think for a combined valuation of over 70 odd million.
70 million.
US.
Since we have to do numbers.
Yeah. And
Look at you. What?
exits, you should write.
Exits, mate.
Exits,
Kidding.
write about the numbers.
I'm kidding.
Because that's
Yeah.
what we're doing it
Yeah.
for in many ways, right? And a lot of founders have this thing that when you're building, that exit is, or you know, your IPO, your exit is that liquidity event, which is there in every single contract, which in many ways is like, for a lot of people, that seems like the destination. And today he's on round 3. He's building his 3rd startup. And I remember asking him, I said, you know, Pankaj, post to exit, do you take like a year-long vacation, 2 years long vacation? Because as a founder building for the first time, that's
Yeah.
what we, that's what you dream about.
Yeah.
It's like, that 10th boards or the 12th boards that, yeah, after that, I will play video games. I will not play video games this year, but after that, I'll play video games. The one thing he told me is like, these are all, it's all part of a destination. There is no, sorry, it's all part of the journey. There is no destination.
Yeah.
He's like, the day after his exit, he said, I had the biggest anxiety attack of my life, saying, Ab kya?
What do I do?
That is insane, right? Like, I think that's a great segue into something I personally wanted to talk about, which is, Megha, what do you think are some of the characteristics as a
Mm.
unbiased person? Avik will have a VC's perspective on this. I would probably have a little bit more of a founder's perspective on this. But what is your perspective on the characteristics of what makes a great founder? What do you think is common, especially having spent time with so much like Dipinder and other founders? What do you think is common in the guys who really make it big?
Um, I think a certain level of emotional complexity. I feel that that sometimes gets taken away from when you're starting up. You just think that, yeah, this is a very rational, practical. There isn't. There is a person who is deeply emotional, but also weirdly complex. There are fears. Is deeply resilient. It's a mixed bag. It's like you spoke about the exit, and I just want to take a second because I feel like even in the book, the first chapter talks about the IPO day. And um, I feel that most stories feel like that's where it ends. But we start unseen, or when I was writing it, I wanted to start it
Yeah.
on that day and what the founder must be feeling or what the team is feeling. Because it feels like the grand finale, right? It feels like, okay, the exit or the IPO, this is a big event until you actually live it and you realize that, okay, but I'm not feeling what I'm supposed to feel. I think those are aspects that make entrepreneurship not a linear journey. And that's true for life as well. It's not a linear journey. And I think understanding that, or when you understand that, is when you can perhaps become a better founder. It's also I think in terms of your question about what makes a good founder or what is it that sets these, it's like when you stop comparing your insides to someone else's outsides, your internal story to someone else's external image. I think when you stop doing that and you realize that this is my journey, this is my story, and I'm going to own it. I think that clarity or that maturity, when that comes in, I think that's perhaps what makes or separates the good founders from the rest. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I guess these are just some of the traits that
I think it's just for us to unpack.
Yeah.
Avik, I think you've seen a lot of founders go to IPO, right?
A few. I would like to see a lot, a lot more in my portfolio. Um,
No, but I'd love to know what is your understanding of their emotional side during that day?
so I think what Megha, you actually captured it in a way where there's a certain amount of, it's almost an empty feeling because everyone tells you this is your
yeah.
day of joy, day of thrill. And for most of them that I've actually spent time with, it's more about, oh my God, we have just spent the last 6 months doing a road show with 100 bankers in 200 cities, effectively going in. Like, it's almost like you're back to your first level of fundraising, where suddenly you're going back and saying, look, this is all I did. Now, please validate me. And you're trying to get that buy-in from your
Yeah.
early investors for your IPO. So that really hurts because it's like, hey, I built this company that's ready to go to IPO, and now it feels like I'm on display again.
Yeah.
So I think that's one piece that definitely resonates.
Yeah, I think also, when you spoke about the big exit or
Yeah.
the IPO, like perhaps like for a journalist, the funding round could feel like the big milestone. For some founders who are starting up or probably listening to this podcast, maybe they are manifesting that day or thinking how they would feel. But I think that the dopamine is the whole journey, right? As you said, it's not that day or that moment. Of course, it gives you a kick, and I'm sure you feel what you feel, and it's deeply complex. But for true builders, I think the dopamine is the whole journey and not
So,
just that one day.
so we were recently with a very close founder friend who happily looked us in the eye and said, only idiots are IPOing. If you're running a great company, run it forever.
Yeah. Okay. That's a school of thought. That's a
Yeah.
school of thought.
I mean, IPO is also fairly investor driven, right?
It's,
So,
yes.
how much of a choice the founders really have in IPO, sir?
I'm not going to answer that.
Hey, come on. This is where we unpack. Let's do some unpacking now, Avik.
So, you know what? I was with somebody, literally, think day before yesterday. Amazing set of founders. I can mention what they do. It's the founders of Ghost Kitchen. They run 12 cloud kitchen brands, and now they've just created their first offline 12 cloud kitchen brands with 100 touch points across the country.
Yeah.
And the founders like, you know what? We actually didn't raise money from any large VCs.
Mm-hmm.
We raised money from a clutch of family offices and two funds we knew very well. Because we knew that we did not want to grow, we can censor this later, but chutiya jaise. We didn't want to keep burning money and growing. And the founder like, I'm really happy because in the last year, my top lines maybe grown 5-6%, but I have gone from burning about 1 crore a month to marginally profitable.
Mm.
And that's what I sent in my investor update. And now I know I can grow at my pace.
Yeah.
I have full control on my growth.
Yeah.
And I mean, you actually mentioned that in the book. I think there's a very clear anecdote from Mr. Mikchandani.
Yeah.
You wanna,
Which section are you talking about?
about profitability
Uh-huh.
is your ultimate freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think Sanjeev, of course, has clearly been a huge guiding force in the Zomato story, and he comes from a certain school of thought, and he was able to kind of pass that on or share that, hey, here's what I think is perhaps a right path to walk on. But ultimately, it is the founders, right? I mean, you choose that path and you choose what makes sense to you. A good business would perhaps chase profitability, but I also think that having seen so many startups and having seen so many founders, you know, the founders that you're looking at or you admire, or the companies that you admire, you just need to realize that every journey is unique and you need to eventually make the right calls for you. And the right decision is not that obvious in that moment. I think that's been a learning as an observer that I have realized when you talk to founders, and I'm sure that you have way more stories that
There are no
sometimes it's
right decisions.
Okay.
There is never a right decision. I think it's an amalgamation of luck, circumstance, how that decision is executed, and
You make it
300
right.
things. Yeah, I think it's right if you win at the end.
Mm.
It's some of the best decisions I've seen, which have gone, or I have only been criticized. It's a very sad bit of it. But you know, now that we've mentioned Sanjeev, I have to say that from a founder's perspective, right?
Yeah.
That when I was reading that chapter, part of me was like, dude, that sounds like the perfect, you know, like it's like a Karan Johar version of a founder investor relationship, right? That when Dipinder is pitching to Sanjeev, he's like, oh, you're aggregating menus, and
Yeah.
at Naukri we used to do the same thing for recruitment, and that just blew my mind. Like it sounds like such a beautiful relationship, but
Yeah.
There are always a lot of things that go unseen.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I love how he just did that spontaneous.
Mm-hmm.
so when you were having a chat with,
Yeah.
obviously you've gone deep, you've spent time
Yeah.
with Dipinder, with Sanjeev, with other investors across the board. Uh, do you feel it was this beautiful match made in heaven? Were there friction points
Of course.
that happened?
Of course. And I think why that feels like a Karan Johar match made in heaven was because there was all of this. I mean, eventually, if you read the book and if you learn about Sanjeev or know of him, and then if you learn about Dipinder and know of him, and you know, you add what you know of him versus what you read, and you put all of those together, these are two very different people who came together and felt like, yeah, this was like a perfect match. I think what made it perfect was not the similarities or the fact that they were always like on the same page. Of course they weren't, and we talk about that in the book too. But the one thing that was sacred in that sense was a deep respect and appreciation for each other. As a investor, Sanjeev knew that he's not the boss of Dipinder and he can only guide and he can suggest, but ultimately the call has to be made by Dipinder. And maybe from Dipinder's point of view, looking back today, a lot of that support maybe that he got from Sanjeev makes sense and it all fell into place. And but back then, I mean, the first deal, you look at that, that was the most expensive deal that he'd ever made, right? That was the most expensive deal of Zomato. But it was just that at that point, that was the right call that Dipinder felt. He followed his instinct and he went and he did that. Over the course, there were decisions that as an investor, Sanjeev felt that this was not the right call for Zomato, and Dipinder still went ahead and did what felt right to him anyway. Did that sour the relationship, or did that maybe like momentarily there would have been disagreements? I'm sure of that, and of course we speak about that in the book too. But ultimately, I think what makes a funder and the founder relationship great is you just need to realize what your role is in the company. Ultimately, it is the founder's vision. You can guide, you can support, you can direct, you can suggest, but you cannot dictate.
Yeah.
And that leap of faith has to be made by the founder. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not. You just have to own it. And that's what, maybe tying back to your very first question, makes a good founder. As long as you own that decision and you say that, okay, good, bad,
Yeah.
ugly, right, wrong, beautiful, IPO, no IPO,
Yeah.
funding, family office, whatever, it's my decision and I'm going to own that. And I think that's the kind of confidence that you gain over time. Sometimes you fake it, sometimes you have it. But that's essentially what starting up is all about. It's messy, it's complex, it's never right, it's not straight. That's what I learned.
For me, like one takeaway, because I've
Yeah.
I've seen this happen with several companies. Some I can talk about, some stories I can share, some I can't. But I've seen that shining vision
Hmm.
of going international.
Hmm.
That I have suddenly spread my wings. I'm no longer an Indian company. I'm a global
Read
company.
unseen.
hence, I'm bringing it up.
Yeah.
So, what at that point, I think that decision
Yeah.
when Dipinder said, "I want to go
Yeah.
abroad," it's obviously you unpacking it in hindsight.
Yeah.
But from the conversation, what do you feel was going through everyone's thoughts at that?
I wouldn't just call it a vanity metric. If it makes sense for your business and you think that it makes sense, go ahead. Speaking particularly of the Zomato story, I think back then they did feel that that was the bigger market and they felt that that was the right thing for them to do. Ironically, they felt that the one thing that they would never do is delivery. And look at how that turned out. Um, at that point, there was definitely a seductive pull to kind of painting the world map red with Zomato. And Dipinder talks about that as well when they went ahead and acquired companies and they started up in so many places. At some point, Zomato was present in 23 countries, including India. And that was like the peak of their glory days, right? But obviously, there were cracks in the system that was starting to show up. And there was so much effort and time and resources that was put in to create that system. Went ahead and acquired Urban Spoon, which at that time made such a splash
Yeah.
that an Indian company has gone ahead and acquired a US based company. And that was seen as such a bold move. But ultimately, that acquisition simply didn't work.
Pan out.
Yeah.
Is there a pull, and are like founders looking at that international? And again, if it makes sense for your business and if it feels right, yes, maybe perhaps that's something that you should do. But later, Zomato realized that India is such a big market and delivery was such a big sort of vertical that they should kind of put in all their focus and resources on. They pulled the plug out of the markets that didn't make sense, and eventually they shut down everything. Um, and I think that that's what made this whole story very human, is because he talks about, or he confesses the fact that it was somewhere egoistical to go ahead and acquire Urban Spoon. Um, and it was as if he was trying to impress someone. Who that someone is, he doesn't even know now. But back then, it just made sense, and they were just at like, okay, let's go, next
Yeah.
move, next move. But that happens with all hyper growth startups, and you kind of make your mistakes and you learn. Some are able to pull themselves out and kind of bounce back. And that's what is so fascinating about Zomato as to how close they were to that near death situation. And some companies, unfortunately, aren't able to do that.
You know, you picked up on one piece that as an investor, I feel that is just never talked about enough,
Uh-huh.
which is near death situations.
Yeah.
And I'm sure interviewing so many folks, you've seen a lot of those, and you've covered them in quite a lot of detail.
Mhm.
Where you've got like a 2015, you've got a 2019, then you've got entering COVID.
Yeah.
And how do you, what do you feel when you've spoken to so many of these founders? What's going through their heads? Could you just help me with that?
I think that's the part that I have to credit Dipinder, that how deeply vulnerable he was in terms of opening up, and honest he was in terms of opening up and talking about those times, and not just saying that, yeah, we made a mistake and move. No. Exactly what was going on with them, the cash crunch situation, how they had so much financial growing up to do. Um, it is a time that makes you question. It is a time that not just makes you question as a founder, but I ended up speaking to so many employees who were with the company at the time, who were kind of seeing this transition happen, who could kind of sense that there is something going on, but they don't have an entire picture because, you're taking care of one thing as an employee. But they could figure out that the mood and the morale was changing within the company. What does one feel? Obviously not great, right? Like the decisions that you thought would make sense. Even investors, I think that was the beauty of it. There were so many investors who kind of did confess that we thought this company would be a global company, but eventually that didn't happen. Or we thought this acquisition would work, but eventually that didn't happen. I think like when something fails and you've put in all that effort and you've put in all your resources into it, it's not just about pulling the plug, but it's also about letting go of that version of you that believed something would work out.
Wow.
And I think that is the human side of starting up. It's not just, okay, one decision didn't work, move.
Yeah.
No, right? There was a version of you that thought this is going to work. There was a picture in your head that you thought this is how my company would look like, or here's where I will be. And eventually when that doesn't happen, dealing with that failure is complex. It's a lot to pull yourself out of it, to learn something from it. I think that takes a lot, and that's where real growth mindset comes in.
I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I'm asking for your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
How much information do you feel that founders should share with the whole company? Like, if I was a young analyst at Zomato at a time when the company was effectively looking at, hey, this could be it.
Mm.
Should I know?
Um, I think it depends on your leadership style, and it depends on who you are as an individual as well. Because sometimes communication, though well intended, couldn't could perhaps not land the way it should. If you think your team has the appetite to kind of take the good news and the bad news and deal with what it takes, uh, you do that. Maybe you identify some pillars of support within the team. Um, how much information should you share with everybody, or should you wait for something to become permanent before you let someone know? I think that's where you define the culture. When you're a smaller team, it's like a family-run church, right? Like everyone knows everything and is marked on everything, and then everything is announced on a town hall. and then eventually that information starts getting distilled. So I feel like that's a very personal call you need to take depending on the size of your team or what you're doing. Like, I mean, if you're working at Apple, you don't really know what the next iPhone looks like, but maybe there is like a group of people who do.
And if they ever reveal it.
Ex-
Oh,
I don't know about that. Oh dear. Wow.
the
What?
journalist inside Megha was just like, oh shit.
What? No, but I think that's a personal call that
Yeah.
you will have to take, and I think that's where defining the culture of your organization comes in. Sometimes delivering the bad news, also helps you assess perhaps who's in it for the long run or who's in it for what. But I guess that communication piece is something that you have to.
Yeah.
It has to be an extension of who you are as a founder.
And that's one of the things that I loved while reading the book, because this is something that I've seen firsthand with hundreds of startups, is that it is so driven by the founder, right? Like, culture is founder culture, in the sense the founder can change culture overnight.
Mhm.
The founder's past childhood experiences, past experiences will dictate a lot of decisions about the company, right? And I think there was an email thread between Sanjeev Bikhchandani and Dipinder Goyal where Sanjeev told Dipinder, look, I'm not the most sanguine about the international expansion. Be
Yeah.
patient,
Yeah.
go slow. But because Dipinder always had that point to prove, right, to a imaginary somebody, that drove so much of Zomato through. And I think kudos to Sanjeev for letting that happen,
Mm.
right? Uh, well, one of the anecdotes which I think was absolutely phenomenal, and I thought it was pure genius, okay, was when Dipinder had to cut costs,
Yeah.
right? And he said, guys, every single expenditure in the company has to
Oh,
be
yes.
approved by me personally, right? Like through an email. And I was just thinking that is such a startup thing to do, even at a stage where you're probably not considered a startup anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And do you think that Dipinder's personality, although because you've almost described him as not wanting the spotlight, being behind
Yeah.
the scenes, being more of the product person, do you feel that his team saw him that way, or do you think that's just how the external world saw him?
No, the team was aware as well, and even the founding team back then, not just Dipinder, but Pankaj as well. Both of them were folks who liked staying out of the spotlight. And I'm saying this because I remember being a journalist trying to get that one interview with someone at Zomato, and they would just not come and talk. They would just be like, yeah, put your head down, just do the work. We don't want to do this. There was hardly any communication that would kind of come from them, or they did interviews, or in most like co-founder setup, there's always that one co-founder who's in the spotlight, and then the other founder who just wants to like stay behind the scenes. But in Zomato's case, at that point with Dipinder and Pankaj, both of them were like that. So I guess that was one side, that internally as well, a lot of the team was like that. Even much later, you speak about the guys that who joined in later as well. They were all like that. That was the culture. They were all like, okay, let's just do our job and let's build in. And that's okay too. There are many founders who don't want to come out there and do those interviews, and they just want to build.
Yeah.
And then there are some who feel that, okay, now is the time that it's necessary that I come and talk about my story, my vision. And there will come that point. You have to, as I was talking about communication internally, externally, you need to take that call as to what is right for you. Just be authentic and stick with it. In terms of the thing on the anecdote, right? Like, it was, I remember when I heard that story for the first time, when Dipinder was talking about that. If you rewind a little, what was happening was a deep failure on the company's part, right? That why are these expenses going up the
Spiraling.
roof?
Yeah.
How did we get into a cash crunch situation? It was a deep learning moment back in 2015. But I guess it's the ability to how quickly you were able to pull yourself out of that. And that's what defines you as a founder, or that's what defines you as a team. How quickly are you able to pull the plug and just have that sunk cost fallacy, right? Saying that, okay, I've invested this time and effort. it doesn't make sense.
It's gone.
Weed it out. This particular aspect is broken. Fix it. Okay, let's move on. I think that speed sometimes not just about how you're moving externally, but internally as well, is what helps you kind of
Yeah.
keep the boat afloat.
Founders don't see themselves as executives,
Mm.
right? Otherwise,
It's their baby.
yeah,
Yeah,
Their life.
yeah,
But one thing that I loved, and I think the beauty about that has also led you to be able to really paint a picture through notes. Is Deepinder very vulnerable about his, I think, his problems with speech, and maybe his own insecurities around speech,
yeah,
which led to such a beautifully note-driven culture or written-driven culture. You'd put at one point that shareholder updates
Yes.
because he just felt so scared to get on calls. Like, I want to write.
yeah.
So that how much of that did you really get time to go through, to spend time, and how did you feel that Deepinder and the company evolved from kind of the first note you got to read
Yeah.
to, let's say, fast forward to
You know, there's this
decade.
the Zomato blog, which is very public. Like there are blog notes all the way dating back from 2010 to current date. So if any, like of course there's that repository. I think what I managed to get my hands on during the research was some of these emails that were sent out to all employees, which only folks that were part of Zomato and later Eternal had access to. Even more personal were those one-to-one emails, which were pure gold, that felt that those emails that you're referring to between Sanjeev and Deepinder, and that exchange that's happening.
Did you get unfiltered access to the inbox?
Unfiltered access to the inbox in some sense, yes. And honestly, there were some of those emails that felt that the content of those was so relevant to anyone reading it. Of course, it's in the context of Zomato and a certain time period or funding, but there was some of those exchanges between a very young founder and a very experienced investor that just felt like it deserved the spotlight and it should be published. And again, credit where it's due to both Sanjeev and Deepinder to kind of be okay with publishing that email and getting that piece out as well. I think that's where the lot of the value comes in. I think the one thing I felt, and we were chatting offline, and I've been thinking about that when you spoke about clarity, right? Like something about clarity, that when does that come in? How does that happen? Those notes that you're talking about, how did you can see the evolution of a person when you're reading those notes and how the tonality of those notes. But still, there is this one piece that I felt that if you read a 2010 email that, say, for instance, Deepinder has written or anyone from the team has written to something that's been sent out in 2025, you can see the maturity, but there is some common threads which talks about sheer vulnerability, openness, and that transparency that the company has maintained from the beginning. In terms of clarity itself, I think my one observation, having seen everything in hindsight, is that clarity sometimes, maybe for founders, gets confused as certainty, but that is not the case. Clarity is maybe not about outcomes or about knowing where this would go, but it's about understanding what is a priority at that point, despite the uncertainty. And I'm just like kind of rambling at this point, but because you spoke about notes, and I realized that that was one thing that I remember feeling that, okay, I'm reading this note, but I spoke to, I've done these interviews. The team knew some things and then didn't know so much of it, and yet they managed to take those calls. So maybe somewhere it felt like in the world of startups, clarity sometimes gets confused as certainty, but it's actually the opposite. It's just about knowing what the priority is at that point and taking the right call. And maybe that's how you evolve as a founder or you gain maturity.
Yeah. I also feel baked into the concept of clarity is this concept of almost unhinged delusional optimism, right? To the point, I think there's this one anecdote as well where Deepinder is the founder of Runner, right?
Yeah.
And said, listen, 12 hours, either you accept my acquisition offer, otherwise you're dead, right? And in the next meeting, Deepinder was a different person, and when you ask Dipinder, hey, did you say this? He's like, no, not really. Did I say that? And I think that is just part of it, right? Like, you almost have a false sense of reality at times,
Yeah.
driven by optimism, which is so baked into that concept of clarity. What do you think about this? Are you dealing with? I think that's what you demand from founders, no?
uh, to take your example, to create something, nothing from nothing or something from nothing, uh, it's insane. It's not a rational decision.
Yeah.
It's for Dipinder to coming from a small town to have quit Bain, which at that point in time was most people's, I think, probably North Star or gold medal. Like, you know, you've done it. You've hit Bain, the big consultancy. To take those kinds of decisions, it's not a rational decision. So the best founders I've ever met, and I could see a lot of that when you were writing about it in the early days, was this is just a problem.
Yeah.
It's an itch. It's something that I'm not building to make. I'm not building to build for the sake of building. I'm not building to make. I'm building because that problem pisses me off,
Mm.
and I want it to be fixed.
Mm.
So I think that's when I see people really dive in, and like it's one of the traits I've noticed as being something in some of the craziest founders I've ever had the privilege to back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where the itch to solve a problem is greater than chasing stability. I think that's what defines entrepreneurs, and the bug that they talk about, I guess, is that to a regular rational person, a founder or their decisions or life choices will never make sense.
Never.
In hindsight, you of course see the glory and you see everything and you see the guts and glory and everything that comes with it, and you're like, yeah, okay, this is great. I also want to do it, but I think it's a different make altogether. And yeah, what you said uh, pretty much sums up like founders in general. Okay, but before we wrap Creature of Habit, I have to ask the question. I know you guys have like read the book. I would love to hear what part kind of resonated with you, or what part did you like?
I want to
There was-
point out
Yes.
that the recovering lawyer Devash has not only read the book, he has
Yeah,
color coded.
What's your copy? You have to show that copy with the
He
note.
has
Well-
color coded notes.
I love it.
Guys.
Love it. I think that's that was so heartwarming to
Yeah.
see all the there it
Ah,
is.
Avik, don't do this.
on
to
its
me.
way.
Avik, don't do this.
It's on
Show
its
it.
way.
Show it. This is what have you like underlined it? Look at
Here,
that.
please.
Yeah, there are
This
scribbles.
this
in the
note
margin.
taking, love that. I love it. So given that you've like, it almost looks like you've studied this, like this is crazy.
I'll tell you, here's the thing also. When
Yeah.
I was reading this book, I don't think I've read a book in a really long time, even pertaining to the ecosystem, where I felt so inspired, exhilarated, and felt that it wasn't a puff piece. Like, I love the fact that you have been super objective about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You've called out stubbornness where it was stubbornness. And to me as a founder, I adore that stubbornness. I think it's important to be a founder. But I love that it did not feel like I was reading a narrative.
Mm.
It felt like I was living that journey through, and I don't think I can say that for a lot of books.
Amazing.
Like,
Thank you.
genuine, not just because you're here, but like on a very genuine note. Yeah, you should take a bow.
Thank you. I think the idea with Unseen was to, a lot of business books do get positioned as playbooks. The idea here was to capture or write it not as a playbook, but to say that, hey, just to make founders feel seen, that this is a deeply emotional, complex journey. It's full of fears, it's full of resilience, doubts, failures. It's not flawless. It's also not a book about how to start up. It's a book about what you go through while you're living through that journey. So
I have a
that's what.
Question on that.
Yes.
How big was the first draft?
Oh man, there could be another book of this size, and different versions of it too, right? Like sometimes there was a version that probably got too human,
Yeah.
and I think like the idea was that if someone doesn't know who Dipinder is, or doesn't know who were the people who kind of built this, and you just read it as characters and just a story, how would that be? So there is that version. Then there was one that was way more like business centric, which would have been probably a slightly heavier read for someone who's not from the world of startups. So idea was to like kind of find that right balance and just keep it human, keep it true. But yeah, the stuff that was, I guess like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that didn't make it, but all for the right reasons. I think it's just the right size and just the right read. There are people who've kind of said that, oh, I read this in one go, and that's exactly what that's what we were going for.
I did too, actually. So both the times, like I started it, I thought I'll read a few chapters. I remember the first time I read it, I was on a flight. The flight ended, and I'm walking like it's online stupid. I do not promote this. I was walking from the airplane to like the the baggage belt
And you-
while I
Oh
could
my
not keep it
God.
down. Yeah, I'm sure I pissed off a lot of people at the airport. Please do not do this at airport, guys.
That is incredible.
But yeah, but what is your favorite part of the book?
So mine would be the right after the first chapter
Yeah.
covering the IPO was from Dipinder's early life.
Mm.
The journey from I'm terrible at pronouncing this name.
Muksar.
Muksa from his hometown, and then the most emotional tangent to me, which connected, was when he sent an email
Mm,
to Sanjeev ji saying, "I have launched in Muksa,"
mm.
and you covered it. I think that's where you
Just
met.
one line.
That's where you mention
Yeah.
that this is the tangent between a great investor and founder relationship,
Yeah.
where there was no need to convey anything more.
Interestingly, that anecdote actually came from Sanjeev, where he remembered that Dipinder had actually picked up the phone on him and just said that, and 4 5 updates, just this is what's happening, and just by the way, we've launched in Muksa. And that's it. There was not anything else that was said on that phone call. And Sanjeev, in during those interviews, had said that he didn't have to say much. I just knew what he is feeling, what it meant. And then when I asked Dipinder that, hey, you remember that phone call, or what did you feel? He was just like, yeah, okay, I just said it. It happened. So I think a lot of it, it sometimes feels like big milestones, but in interviews, it's just so stoic. But there's so much that's unsaid, and I think that's what the book was about.
Fantastic. So, we usually end up coming up with some cliched fist bump for an ending.
Okay.
We've got a trained journalist with us today.
Oh my God. It's been some time since I've done this. But yeah, I guess it was great
We're at
talking
a
to you guys.
panel called We Should Do the Ball Bump. Should we try that?
Oh.
Should we try that?
Oh, you should just.
Just
Yeah.
you got that?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. This was amazing. And I hope the sun did not bother you, Devarsh, and just like yeah,
It's okay.
yeah.
This is what it takes to get Devash in the outdoors, by the way.
Oh, love it. Yeah.
Yeah. This morning, my parents were so happy I was gonna pickle paddle cord. They're like, "Oh, Devash is working hard," and then they're like, "Oh, podcast." Yeah,
Maybe now you'll move to the next score.
but hopefully when they see it, they'll be super happy.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having
Thank
me,
you
guys.
for
And
being here.
thank you for the crew for bearing with us. I know we went overboard, but thank you, guys.
Thank you.